Hello everyone, and welcome to today's WG6 webinar organized under Cost Action Sustain. My name is Said Ishaq Daliri and Muhammad and I will be moderating this session. Our goals for this webinar are to share insights on accessing research fundings, promote community building among young researchers, and explore together how cost can better support your growth. Muhammad?
Thanks, Ian. So this is our activity by the Working Group 6, and we want it to be as collaborative as possible. For this purpose, what we have on agenda is that we want to first of all have an exercise where we get to know each other. So we have basically begun with a short speed networking activity to get to know each other. Uh, for this purpose, we have now opened the breakout rooms, and you're requested to please take a moment to introduce yourself and mention one of the challenges you face as an early career researcher. And then we can meet after 10 minutes and then proceed to the webinar actually. So now you will be assigned to the different rooms automatically.
Okay, you should all see now an option to join the rooms as well. Great. Syed, may we ask you now to introduce our speaker for today?
Okay, thank you. Welcome back everyone, and I hope you had a chance to connect and share experiences. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Dr. Nadia Bazihizina, Assistant Professor at the Biology Department of Università degli Studi di Firenze. Dr. Bazihizina will present on how to apply for research funds as a young researcher. Nadia, thanks for joining us. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It's a big topic, quite an interesting. So let's go. If I understand how to share I'll share my screen. Can you see it?
Yeah, we can see it. If you can put it on the presentation mode, that would be perfect.
All right, so it's not in presentation mode.
Now it is. So now it's
okay.
not.
Okay. Now it is?
Now it is. Great.
Okay,
thank you.
Perfect. Yes, that's the $1 million question, isn't it? How to get funding when you move on from a PhD. When you're doing PhD, you're still doing research, but then you're starting your pathway towards independence. And it can be quite, I would say, tricky when you move on into that phase. So for today, I just wanted to tell you briefly what was my experience, like what did I do, how long it took me. And I think people have different journeys, and I will talk to you about my journey. I'll tell you a bit the landscape we have here in Europe a bit, and then I'll talk about some tips and what helped me when I went into the process of writing grant proposals. So a bit about my journey. So I started at University of Florence as an undergraduate and then did my thesis in Australia. So I found a PhD there. And that was the first time I tried to apply for a fellowship. And I said, let's just try. And I got it. So that was really cool. And I ended up at UWA in Australia for 3 years. After my PhD, okay, so that was a bit the critical phase there. I'll try and put that down maybe. Okay. So that was a bit of a tricky time. I started looking for PhD for some grants after my PhD. Couldn't find anything, but I was lucky to find a postdoc in Italy. Then I applied for another fellowship, again to go back to Australia. And then came back to Italy and started writing my Marie Curie fellowship, which I got, and then moved to, again, in Australia. So I did a lot back and forward between Italy and Australia. And then finally went back to the University of Florence. That's where, I got involved in this cost sustain world, this network. And then I got the tenure track. So to give you some numbers, so I finished my master's in 2005, got my PhD in 2007, went back for my first postdoc in 2011 when I finished my PhD, went back to Australia 2016, Marie Curie until 2019, and sorry, I went to tenure track in 2023. So as you can see, it hasn't been very quick, but it's been fun. And, it's been an excellent process. I got to travel a lot, meet a lot of people. And in this whole process, I wrote, I got 3 different fellowship or grants in the whole process. And so that was, I thought that this process really taught me how to be a researcher. And what opportunities are there for early career scientists, which is the question. And often, sometimes you go into it and you find, oh, this is a big world. There's a lot to do. And so I've divided these into 2 time frames. So you have during the PhD, which is very important if you're still doing your PhD, I think, and after the PhD. And usually for most grants, the PhD defense is your cutoff time for everything. And often I said, it depends, of course, on the salary, but that was a suggestion at the time, my professor supervisor told me. So if you have funding available, don't rush into finishing your PhD. Just write your papers. So by the end you end your PhD defense, you have maybe some papers published. But again, that depends on the funding and if you have a salary that is paying you. But again, for most of the grants you're applying, the PhD defense date will be the cutoff time for everything. And then I've divided the whole post-PhD into periods. So the first, the second, the third, and then those numbers are years after your PhD defense date. So during the PhD, these are all the different fellowships or grants that you can have. You can get to travel, use, and so you can go from the Erasmus Plus to get funding that enables you also after the PhD, but that enables you to go and travel to labs, cost actions, of course. And then you have some others like the EMBO short-term fellowship, the National Geographic, which is another source of grants, which is often not considered. And as, for instance, we're talking about salinity, now they have, for instance, a call for sustainable, agriculture. And then I put this as a double asterisk. You have the Marie Curie Staff Exchange, but for that often you have to be part already of a network that has applied for this kind of grants that allows for PhD to travel around. And then you have everything that comes after your PhD. And that is very important to take into account of the time, the years after PhD. And if I went back into time, I would have perhaps applied for grants in a different manner. Okay, because there is those cutoff times, which I did not consider at the time, I wasn't aware of. But I think this is something important to know when you're looking for grants. For instance, you have the EMBO fellowship, which is a 2-year fellowship that allow you to go after your post-PhD, but you have to do that within 2 years from your PhD. You cannot do that after. So again, if you're starting to write, I think this is a good grant to start with, and it offers a salary, and then you have to move though to another lab. And there are some regulation about the countries where you can travel to. And then there's this one, for instance, the Human Frontier, Science Frontier Fellowships. Again, this is very good. And especially this one has some rules about the field where you need to be in. Like, for instance, you cannot keep working in the same field. You have to slightly change. But that one is also a really good grant. But that one is, you have to do it within 3 years from your PhD. After that, you can't do that anymore. Then you have the ERC starting grant. And I think when you're thinking about the grants, it's always good to think, don't be afraid to say my CV is not good enough. It is, okay? Don't be afraid and apply and see what feedback you receive. You have the Marie Curie fellowships, and that goes only up to 8 years after your PhD. If you go beyond, you cannot apply anymore. And the Marie Curie has the European fellowship and the global fellowship. The European is only a 2-year program, whereas the global, where you have to go out of Europe and then come back, is a 3-year program. You have the ERC consolidator, which comes after, I think, from 5 years onward from your PhD. And then, of course, you have cost action that allows you to travel. And that's very important because I think this traveling, visiting labs is very important also to get to the other grants, the bigger grants later on. And then, again, the National Geographic grants, which I think are really nice grants. they allow you to explore different topics. They have every year different topics which you can apply to. And then the OECD fellowships, which one? This is also a really nice one. But this one, and the nice thing about this one is you need to include the policy aspect of it. So it's not just only research, but you need to, you need to clearly say, okay, I've considered different aspects and consider the policies. And this is another one that also allows you to travel and receive a salary to go somewhere. Didn't include, so all those were the big ones. The grants were they globally open, and generally they allow you to travel in different countries. But again, if you look around, different countries will have different grants to travel to those specific countries, both before and after. For instance, in Germany, you have the Humboldt, I can't pronounce that, fellowship. To go to Australia, you have the Australian Research Council, who also gives fellowships, and there are the DECRA, which really focus on the first years of your PhD. And here as well, your curriculum will be evaluated on how many years you are after your PhD. Okay, and again, the ERC, the Australian Research Council, will give you the future fellowship, which comes after the DECRA, after 5 years from your PhD. And the ERC, the Future Fellowship, is a 5-year grant. Okay, so it's quite a substantial grant. And to go to US, you have the Fulbright, and then for women, you have the L'Oreal one. And here in Italy, for instance, you need to be under 35 to apply for this one. So again, it's very important to consider that timing effect, because if you go off that critical phase where you're eligible, you lose out on the opportunity. So I think to have an idea of this timing and understanding of where the cutoff date is very important. So how to get there? I think one thing that I never realized until I go into writing the Marie Curie was that you need to have a career development plan. Okay, you need to understand which lab you want to go to. I think, it's important to have funding, but you need to also understand the direction of where you want to go, which skills you want to develop, and that has to come through your proposal. So it's not just about the research and the idea, but when you're writing these proposals, you have to consider all these different points, and you have to mention them in the proposal as well. Okay, so how are you going to manage your projects? What are your skills? What are you going to acquire? Okay, and in the lab, where you're going and all that. This is something, the career development plan, actually in the Marie Curie, you have to detail it. It's like, okay, I'm going to proceed like that. I'm going to do some teaching. And this is things that you really have to include in your proposals. And the other thing as well, and which is the topic of this webinar, is that no one is an island. You do need mentorship. I asked, well, not only because you have to write about your career development plan in this, but you need to show that perhaps you've traveled and you've applied for other grants, you got some grants. So I think, and this peer network and mentorship is very important, and start creating it very early. So in terms, I'm quickly finishing, in terms of the tips, there are a lot of grants out there. I know it's difficult, you have to look into it. And actually I've noticed, I asked the other day, when I was thinking about what to write, ChatGPT was like, what are the grants available there for, and it came out with a very extensive list of grants I never heard before, and it was, for instance, by chance that I discovered the OECD fellowship, which is a really good grant. Okay, but you really need to look online and search. Don't hesitate to ask for help. I think that's the other thing. I'm always asking for help if I can. I ask people if they can give me the successful proposal. If they can, well, that's okay. But anyway, don't be worried to reach out to people and say, okay, can you please suggest what I can improve here, what's missing? And you also probably will, if you have mentors, they have evaluated the proposal, they will tell you what's missing or not from your proposal. This is the other one, and that is linked to the career development plan. Understand what you're looking for, because there are a lot of grants. What are you looking for? Are you just looking for a short term? You're looking for long term? Are you ready to move to another country? Okay, so these are important things that you need to consider when you're looking for the grant, and read the guidelines. Often, if you look at the guidelines, you'll find all the information they want you to mention. And when I evaluated proposals, there is a, a specific things that need to be in the proposal. If they're not in, you get less points for that. Okay, so this is very important. Look at the guidelines and they tell you what they're really looking for, and check the eligibility, because I had friends who had their proposal, not approved because just of an eligibility problem. Okay, they didn't have the right age, or for instance, Marie Curie, you cannot have been in the same country where you want to apply for. You have to move. So this is, and she had been 1 month more than what like my colleague had been there for 1 month more than what she was expected to be. And for that reason, she was not eligible, etc. So this is quite important. And sometimes even those cutoff, if you had breaks in the years, you can extend that period, but you really need to look at the eligibility and what you can do. Take your time to write the proposal. Okay, for it won't happen in a month. Maybe in a month you can take later on, once you have a bit of experience in writing proposal, then it's okay to say, I'll take myself a month. But usually 3-4 months, and often, you have to go to your second time. So it takes time to write a good proposal. And there's some other thing, once my supervisor told me, if you look at the proposal, you have to think this is fantastic work, okay? Because if you think it's fantastic, then you have a chance. But if you think, oh, I haven't done such a nice job, that already. So you really need to put your time and try to polish it as much as possible. And the last point, I think, I wasn't told, and it was quite hard the first time you have your proposal that have been, rejected, and but it happens to everyone. And I'm just going to show you some numbers. This is the Marie Curie this year. There were 17,000 proposals, and if you think about it, only 1,700 proposals will be funded, roughly. Okay, so that's a 10% success rate. That means that more than 15,000 proposals will be rejected. Okay, so again, you have to take that into account. And personally, so there's a spelling mistake, I always think that given there's 10% success rate, my idea is I need to write 10 proposals to have one successful, okay? At least, and there is that writing going on, and the more you write, the better you become. So I think I'm always saying, if there is something, apply for it, okay? Don't be afraid and just do it. And don't forget, again, that networking is really key for all the different aspects. And these, for instance, are all the people I met during my PhD, after, and all these people I reached out. And if I have to write something, if I have to say, okay, a grant, I reach out to people and ask for help. I'm not afraid to do it. And with time, all these people become friends as well, and they can help in this process of writing. And again, maybe writing the second time when you're feeling, oh, I don't want to do it, but I think it's very important. And you have the cost action, such a big network. More than that is really, I think here you can find support for what you're looking for. So to conclude, the take-home message, look around, okay? There are plenty of opportunity around. It feels like perhaps, but if you look online, you can find, and start small as well. You don't need to get the 5-year fellowship on the first. Start with small fellowship, perhaps, again, and then that will build your CV and will allow you to then apply for a bigger fellowship. But again, take into account that, when I showed you at the beginning, there are times when windows where it's best to apply for some, then make perhaps a concrete choice in which one you would like to apply first, considering all the time cutoff points for the eligibility criteria. Again, as I said before, don't be afraid to try. I think for several grants, I had to apply a few times before it got accepted. So I think it's okay. And actually, it improves your proposal. If I look the first time I apply for Marie Curie, and then the second, that's like so much better, and then and you get that feedback, and you're trying to use that feedback to correct your proposal. And then again, create a good network, because to me, that has been the basis, because I had very good mentor. I was very lucky throughout my careers. I always had good mentors that helped me. I sent them my proposal, asked them for a feedback. They always gave it to me. And also friends, I reach out to other colleagues saying, oh, can you please look at this? And people who are not in your field as well, okay? Because sometimes we tend to write things that are really very specific to our own fields. And I always said that my dad is my best reviewer. He looks at it, I read something. If he does not understand it, that means I need to change something in the writing there because it's too complicated. or perhaps it's very specific to my own field. So I think this is something, try not to use too much jargon, your field specific terms, because you never know the reviewer who's going to be, if he's exactly in your field or not. So you always have to try and be very clear when you're writing. With that, I think that's it. Thank you. And yeah, if you have any question, please let me know. And also happy to answer some question via emails if you have further questions.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Nadia, for these valuable insights. We now have time for questions. And we have one question for now. Primitiva asks, in Europe, who is early career scientist?
The question, the definition of early career scientist in Europe?
Yeah,
Okay.
the question is, in Europe, who is early career scientist?
So the definition of the cost is under 40. So that's the definition of an early career scientist. If you're under 40, I think that could be used. Again, I think it's very important when you're applying for the fundings to look at the cutoff points. So some fundings are for 2 years after your PhD, but usually the 40 years mark is considered as the cutoff points. But again, some people might do their PhD later on. So some grants don't look at the anagraphical age, but they'll look how long it's been since you finished your PhD. With, I would say, an early career scientist, I would put the cutoff point to 8 years after your PhD. After that, you become quite an experienced researcher.
Okay, thank you. And there's another question from Islam Farhat. Many thanks for your substantial presentation. I would like to know tips and tricks to write a strong proposal for biodiversity.
Okay. For the biodiversity stakeholder engagement, you really have to consider the part of the stakeholder, because this is something that really take into account when they're evaluating your proposal, even if in the guidelines they're already telling you write about stakeholder engagement. So, and consider that, I don't know, I haven't read the new biodiversity guidelines, but the new call this year, but I think it's very important that you consider citizen engagement, citizen science, for instance. And again, you need to be quite clear in what you're going to do. It doesn't have to be super hard, like something that's going, they need to clearly understand how you're going to move from the lab or the field to the stakeholders. So that to me is very important to consider.
Okay. Any other questions? Do you have any questions? We have time. Feel free to write in the chat or directly ask.
Perhaps also a question from my side. If I may, I was wondering, how do you choose? There are so many different grants. How do you choose which one to go for? Because time is limited. It takes a lot of time and energy. We have to do other things as well. How to choose?
Yeah, for that, I think go back to the career development, what you're looking for. And especially because a lot of the grants for early career, they require you to move. So to me, that is the first cutoff points. And I think you need to understand if you're prepared to move or not, if you want to stay in your own country or you want to go a specific country. And then I would look at the time frame of the cutting points and maybe also the salary. And the topic of the grant is some grants are quite open, you can choose. But again, if you have early stage, I think start writing with smaller grants. I think, because I remember it took me like months to write me my first big proposal, and I can see that the further you go, it takes me less time, but because I've learned how to write it, and I think so. I usually probably would suggest, if you're first time writing a grant, start small and understand where you want to go and visit someone specific. You want to understand who you want to go and visit. Okay, let's look at what grant I can use to go and visit that person, for instance. I want to go and work. For instance, for me, a lot of time I wanted to go to Australia, so I looked for grants that allowed me to travel there. So that, again, is understanding what you want and what's your goal at the end. That can allow you to choose. And then, yeah, I think it's always best to start from small to big. I think you learn to understand what they want, what the reviewer is looking in the proposal, and that all the tricks to write it. And I think in the new grants, a lot of impact. Impact is a big thing in the grants. Don't leave it for last. Okay, so just because in a lot of grant is a third, for instance, of your communication and impact. Don't put it in the background like, oh, I'm going to think about that the last 2 days before the proposal. No, because nowadays they count for a big proportion of your final score. So just start thinking about it from the beginning.
All right, it seems that we don't have any more questions, so maybe we can move to the next session. Thank you, Nadia. It was indeed a promising overview of possible funding opportunities for researchers. Actually, funding was one of the major challenges we have just discussed in our breakout session. So, as I mentioned in the start of this meeting, that we want this webinar to be as networking friendly as possible. In the last breakout session, we discussed the challenges faced by early career researchers. So maybe now we can move into the possible solutions and where the sustain project can come into action. I see one of the raised hands, so maybe, yeah. Surya, maybe you have a question?
Yeah, she has asked, I'm about to get a doctorate. What do you recommend for research after a doctorate, for example, postdoc?
You want, I can, so that depends on your field, I guess, and what interests you. And I think you can, again, depending on where you want to travel and what you want to do, you can look for a topic that interests you. So for the postdoc, the first thing with, for instance, for a postdoc, you can look for what's available, what's advertised in different where you want to travel to. But I think it's always good to look at what you've done and what you like during your PhD. I think that can provide a guideline for what you want to do after. Maybe you've done something in your PhD that you really like, then you should continue along that line and look for specific postdocs in that area, and then and see how to move from there.
If I may ask one more question, because this is also something I see quite a lot. Should people go for individual grants or should people go for team grants? Because they are very different specialization.
They're very, very different. So I think the team grants are really nice. At least that was when I was an early career scientist, perhaps I didn't have the network to do a team grant. And that was one issue that I had. So I didn't have the network. So I didn't know what team grants were happening around. And perhaps at the lab where I was working is usually the professor that ends up in the grant or something like that. So I think, and in Italy, actually, that's a rule here in Italy. You cannot apply normally for grants unless you have a tenure track position at university or research, So that was a bit the limit. So for me, I guess my only option was to go for individual grants. So again, that depends on your situation and the situation in the country where you are. If you're in a country where you can apply for team grants, then I think that's a really nice, because you write with other people you build, and I think it would be nice to go with the team grant. But personally, from my experience, my only option was really the individual grants, and then once I got the researcher position, then I could apply for. Then I went mostly for team grants. So I don't know, perhaps in the Netherlands, is it different? Can you apply for grants once you are also at the early stage of your career?
Yeah, perhaps just to comment here really briefly. Indeed, yeah, that's different here. It also, I guess, depends on the institution. But I applied for my first team grant when I didn't have PhD yet, and it actually went really well. This was the team with which I started and then continued working for a couple of years. So here, yeah, you can apply for grants also when you're not senior researcher. But I guess this is indeed very country specific, and it may depend not only on the country but also institution and perhaps even set up in your lab whether your supervisors are fine with that. So I guess that this can be very specific, but at every stage of career, there are also individual grants which you can try.
We have another question from Monsef Nefa. Are there any platforms that post grant calls that we can check periodically?
Yes, so you can check on the EU platform, the Horizon, the Horizon Europe platform for grants. And but again, there are many other grants that do not fall into the umbrella. So I think for me the best is would be to check an overview of what's available there. Again, I was surprising, but to me, ChatGPT gave me a whole list of grants I didn't know, and I looked and I was like, oh, look at that, you know. There's surprisingly, and you can ask them specifically, okay, I have this nationality, I would go for a grant to go here, and what's available there. But I think you need, sometimes for Europe, there's the Horizon Europe, which is very good for all the grants, but there's also a lot of other grants happening, maybe even from private foundations, you know, the GSPS, for instance, in Japan, if you want to go to Japan, but you need to know about it. And if you don't, and then once you know about it, perhaps you can then look at the various deadlines and things they have. You regularly look for it. But again, you need to do this first online search, I think. Or for instance, here in my university, we have the research office, the grant office that will tell us, okay, we have all these grants happening and you can apply, you know, depending on your interest, you can tell them your interest and then they will send you the details of the grants. But I think looking online and you can then find all these other grants that you can pin them and regularly check them and have an idea. For instance, all the partnerships now, which is some of them are advertised through the Horizon Europe, but a lot of partnerships, the Water for All, or you know, for these team grants, and the Future Foods as another partnership that offer grants, and I think it's good to just have an idea of the landscape that is there, and then decide which one you're going to follow periodically to go and check if there is something open at the time.
Okay, with this, I think we'll now again move into the short breakout discussion, basically to reflect on how Sustain can better support early career researchers. So it will be more about Sustain and the way it can help early career researchers, or how Sustain can help young researchers to grow. These are the questions in mind which we will be discussing in this breakout session. So now we will again assign you into different breakout rooms where you can talk about it.
Okay, the rooms are open now. You should have an option to join them, and I will also post the question in the chat. we are now back to the plenary, and I know that you've discussed a couple of interesting things. So I wanted to ask, what is the one suggestion that you have for Sustain that can improve and help young people to apply for the grants? Who would like to share what they discussed in the breakout rooms? The floor is open. Okay, Nadia, I see your hand. Please go ahead.
Yes, we said that it was a suggestion came from Lofty that perhaps an application where you can, with ChatGPT you can already have some information, but you can have an application where that information you can go into the topic, the area, and all that way. You can be way more specific, and that feeds you the grants and the deadlines and everything.
Okay, that's a very good suggestion. So also the more narrow the search, the better it works. And I see suggestions from Leonardo, Impact Canvas. Leonardo, can you tell us more about it?
Sure. Usually for young researchers, one of the major problems is to better understanding the life cycle for proposal writing. And I think the Impact Canvas is a central point for each project now that we are doing. Because you need to have a needs, you need to see the activity, which can be the stakeholder, how the dissemination activity should be done. Usually for any project that you do, particularly for people who have no idea about research management aspect, that will be a good starting point. Because, majority are very good in research, but maybe there are some topics there to do more, supporting research, like a training, workshop, some school activity. But you need to create them from the Impact Canvas first.
Yeah, thank you. This is a really good suggestion and also a good tip, especially for people starting, how to start from scratch and how to really steer it. Thanks a lot for sharing.
Can I say a few words?
Sure.
This week we are going to do a specific training on how PhD they can become research managers. Because more than become researchers, also it would be good for them to understanding how the research management framework and skill for pre-awarding and post-awarding will be important. And that will be extremely important what kind of skill we can use for this process.
Nice, this is great. Is it possible for people to join online or?
I need to double check, but I can share with you the presentation without any problem. So we usually do from European Research Management Association aspect in this case. So.
Great, thanks a lot. That would be fantastic. Okay, thanks a lot again. I think we're heading towards the end of our meeting, well, webinar and meeting at the same time. So I would like to thank everyone for joining today. It was great to have you and good to hear that there were fruitful discussions in the rooms as well. And at the same time, I would like to invite you for the upcoming webinar that will be the webinar of the Working Group 1 that will take place on the 30th of September at 4 p.m. So 4 p.m. Central European time, again for 1 hour. And that will be the last webinar in this series. Thank you very much, Nadia, for the inspiring speech. Thank you, everyone, for joining in discussing together. Syed and Muhammad, thanks a lot for moderating. Have a good afternoon and a good week ahead.
Ciao.
Ciao.
Thank you.